Hello, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here filling in for Dr. Kit Dobson. I've been a teaching assistant for Kit before, and kind of the topic of relevance here is Kit's 251 class. So at the University of Calgary, there's a class called 251, Literature and Society, and each instructor kind of customizes it to discuss a certain topic. So for 2 years now, Kit has taught on the subject of banned books. I very much wish he could bring his expertise and his research here, but I will be trying to do that for him. So I would like to share Kit's opening remarks as they take a position that I share as well. So he says, I contend that we are at a challenging time in our culture when it comes to open and free expression, and that the energy around this debate in 2025 makes conversations about books and literature as vital as ever. My position is that the free exchange of ideas, paired with respectful debate and discussion, are vital to the creation and maintenance of a vibrant society, and this position applies to the importance of offering a wide range of diverse reading opportunities to all. So as the teaching assistant for Kit's 251 course, I was able to witness the discourse and discussion among the students, and I just want to share it's really heartening to hear how students are feeling about these book bans, which is negatively. And I'm teaching right now Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, which you may have picked up a copy of, is of course one of the books targeted by these bans. Sorry. Thank you. Yes, I will move that to my face. So Kit does this exercise in 251 when he will ask students to pretend that they are being asked, which they unfortunately aren't, about how they feel about these book bans and if they would choose to ban certain books. So I did this exercise with my class, and all of them said no to banning Fun Home, which was, again, very encouraging. One of the books that Kit taught and is currently teaching in 251 is Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, which was also on the table out there. I wanted to share some words from Kobabe in reaction to the banning of genderqueer. So Kobabe describes how, quote, queer youth are often forced to look outside their own homes and outside the education system to find information on who they are. Removing or restricting queer books in libraries and schools is like cutting a lifeline for queer youth who might not yet even know what terms to ask Google to find out more about their own identities, bodies, and health, end quote. So Genderqueer, if you read it, is a beautiful exploration of the author who uses air pronouns, discovering air gender identity. As you all know, we are already at the point where the rights of trans youth are actively being undermined and stripped away. Their existence is constantly politicized and demonized. Trans joy and self-expression are precious and worth defending, and literature that represents them is a part of that. In a comic he wrote for the Washington Post, Kobabe says, please leave the queer books on the library shelves where the queer teens can find them. As a queer teen, I desperately needed them, and the queer teens of today need them too, end quote. So as I've mentioned, Kit has researched extensively book bannings across North America. And this focus has grown over the last few years, but what tipped him into taking an active interest were events that came into the news in January of 2023. In January, the schools of Manatee County, Florida, were in the news. The reason? Libraries were all being closed in the schools. Pictures were showing up online, like this one, of books being cordoned off from student access or being removed entirely, leaving bare shelves behind. The reason for these closures and removals were somewhat complex. In Florida, the state Congress, led by Republican Ron DeSantis, had enacted House Bill 1467, which came into effect in July of 2022. The text of the bill is readily available online if you want to peruse it. Charles Bethea, writing in The New Yorker, summarized it as follows. The bill, he writes, quote, mandates that books in Florida's public schools be free of pornography and suited to student needs, as determined by a librarian or school media specialist, end quote. While the bill does not define what constitutes pornographic content, it uses the word only once, it does make reference to further pieces of existing legislation. The bill, moreover, establishes parental and community processes for objecting to library content. School boards were faced with at least two significant challenges when this legislation was passed. First, there was no process established for retraining school media specialists or librarians. Guidelines were not posted until January of 2023. In effect, the situation meant, or could be interpreted to mean, that there were no people in place who could determine what constituted appropriate books for schools. The second challenge is that the other existing legislation on which this bill builds was interpreted to mean by school administrators that anyone guilty of violating this bill could be subject to being charged with a third-degree felony crime in Florida, which can lead to a prison term of up to 5 years and/or a $5,000 fine and/or an additional 5 years probation, something that has been remarked upon in a few contexts, including a recent talk in Calgary by Kenneth Kidd, a faculty member in Florida who has been actively investigating the shifts there. In effect, then, according to the narrowest interpretation of the legislation, there was no one in place to determine which books could be given to students, and for anyone else to give students books could lead to 5 years in prison. As a result, Florida schools decided to proceed cautiously. Alongside Manatee County, which initially made the news, Duval County decided to take the most cautious approach, to err on the side of caution, as their administration put it. The ultimate result, children in these Florida county schools were not allowed to access books, full stop. In August of 2023, the school district of Manatee County submitted its list of banned or restricted books to the state. Whereas the rhetoric today around banned books cites concerned parents, in this case it was parents and members of the community who complained about the 43 books banned, all of which were library books and not part of any curriculum. They were all marked as inappropriate for grade level and age group, though none of them were listed as pornographic or unsuited to students' needs and ability to comprehend, as per the bill. Of the 43 books, 8 had gay, transgender, or gender-fluid characters, and 3 are about families with LGBTQ+ parents. These were banned along with books that featured graphic language, incest, domestic violence, or communism. Oh no. Others were simply picture books about insects and pangolins. One had illustrations of a hugging lion. The responses to the Florida legislation brought about precisely the sorts of online commentary that one would expect, the usual and wide-ranging sorts of things. One of the common threads was a comparison between the circumstances and the sorts of scenarios depicted in some of the famous books that students could no longer access, such as the information control in George Orwell's 1984, the destruction of books in Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and the gendered legislation around books and reading in Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, the latter of which, of course, brings us closer to a Canadian context. Following the decision of Alberta's Education Ministry to remove, among other texts, The Handmaid's Tale from school libraries, you might have seen the satirical short story Atwood released about 2 very, very good children named John and Mary who never do anything wrong and have, quote, 5 perfect children without ever having sex, end quote. The legislation in Florida is only one among others in the state that targets education. Perhaps most known is the Stop Woke Act, specifically the Stop the Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act, passed in late 2021, and the bans on what Florida and other legislators have used the blanket term critical race theory to denounce educators in a range of ways. One Democrat senator in Florida, Audrey Gibson, said that this legislation was a form of fear-mongering. Quote, "No one is teaching critical race theory," end quote, adding that, quote, this is a bill in search of a problem we don't have," end quote. Nevertheless, teaching students, including college students, to feel discomfort due to their race or sex is being banned in Florida and elsewhere. The example of Florida is one that is happening in real time. These pieces of legislation are all still having impacts that are unfolding in the news around us. The ultimate direction of these things is something as yet unknown. In August of 2024, though, we saw the first time a state has outlawed a list of books statewide in Utah. So some of these books included titles by Sarah J. Maas, most known for A Court of Thorns and Roses, and then Judy Blume, which is an author who was mentioned earlier. Implementation guidelines say that banned materials must be legally disposed of and may not be sold or distributed. PEN America Freedom to Read program director Casey Meehan said that such vague guidelines will, quote, undoubtedly result in dumpsters full of books that could otherwise be enjoyed by readers, end quote, and that while they stop short of calling for book burning, the effect is the same, a signal that some books are too dangerous. But is this really where the danger lies? In May of 2025, President Trump fired Librarian of Congress Carla Hayden. In an interview with PBS, Hayden quotes Alberto Menguel, saying that, Quote, as centuries of dictators, tyrants, slave owners, and other illicit holders of power have known, an illiterate crowd is the easiest to rule. And if you cannot restrict a people from learning to read, you must limit its scope. And that is the danger of making sure people don't have access, end quote. Scaling up to the US context, we can see some clear patterns emerging. The American Library Association reports that 2023 was the year with the largest number of book challenges ever recorded since data began to be compiled. In 2023 in the United States, 4,240 unique book titles were challenged in 2023, up from the 2,571 unique book titles that were challenged in 2022, which is up from the 1,858 in 2021, which was up sharply from 223 in 2020, and comparable numbers in the 200s to 300s in the years prior. Something is happening in this moment. Books are more important than ever, and they are being challenged more than ever. In 2024, interestingly, the ALA reported a slight drop in challenges to individual book titles to 2,452 individual titles. Since this trend began, this is the first time that the numbers have shown a decrease. Instead, the ALA report argues, organized movements are shifting their focus from individual book titles to simply challenging the funding and existence of libraries themselves. To quote Carla Hayden again, librarians are prepared to defend their choices of materials and services that they provide. What they really would appreciate is more public support, vocal public support, saying we want to make sure that our children have access to these materials. Let's think for a moment more about when and why books are challenged. The ALA notes that the three top reasons why books are challenged are as follows. 1, the material was considered to be sexually explicit. 2, the material contained offensive language. Or 3, the materials were unsuited to any age group. So something that we talked about in our discussion of genderqueer in 251 was that there is a depiction of a nude body in the text, but it's for the purposes of describing how traumatic gynecological exams can be, especially for someone who's experiencing gender and body dysmorphia. Yet it's often called sexually explicit. The ALA notes, moreover, that most bans are unsuccessful. Their position is that materials should all be freely available and that the only people who should be able to determine whether material is appropriate for a child are the parents or caregivers of that child. There are additional terms that we might use, including censorship and suppression. We might see book bans as a version of censorship, which can also include the altering of a text or removing some of its contents. As we draw towards the end of this presentation, I would like to shift the scale to Canada, where book challenges and bans have also been taking place with increasing frequency. This pattern was foreseen by Globe and Mail columnist as well as book author Marcia Lederman in May 26, 2023. This article starts with Florida as well and suggests that the news about books has felt like a descent into an Orwellian dystopia. She notes in particular the targeting of sex education books, as well as those with LGBTQ and BIPOC themes, and the targeting of librarians who have been accused of being groomers. Ultimately, her argument is that the scale of challenges has been unprecedented and is growing. She notes, too, that artists become likely to self-censor in this environment, shifting their language, contents, or themes in order to avoid being publicly targeted. She considers her own work, in part, in this context, and she discusses some of the texts that Kit has taught in 251, including The Handmaid's Tale, and Cree author David Alexander Robertson's The Great Bear. Okay. So thank you so much for your attention, and at this time, I'll turn it over to Tanya and Jamie.
This is our first slide, right, Jamie? Yeah. Next one, okay. Thank you. Yeah. I would like to say thank you to Jamie for preparing this PowerPoint and for conceiving of this essay that has been published that we're drawing from this evening. So in April 2023, Danielle Smith told a small town audience, I look at the Americans. I look at Ron DeSantis in Florida and Kristi Noem in South Dakota. They've been able to create little bastions of freedom. And we can create a little bastion of freedom in Alberta as well. It was troubling to hear our premier lionize DeSantis and define his policy agenda as freedom-oriented, especially when it included don't say gay, stop woke, and other anti-EDIA, equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility legislation. Since 2023, Alberta's legislation has mirrored that of Florida's. Like DeSantis, Smith has formalized parental rights into law, restricting gender-affirming care, limited future responses to public health emergencies, and introduced book bans to that growing list. Limiting the individual rights of marginalized groups and erasing diverse perspectives from education settings is inherently anti-pluralistic. It seems that this American brand of anti-pluralism is the freedom Smith aspires to. In Alberta's initial announcement about school library book restrictions, the government published excerpts from 4 books online, 3 of which are LGBTQ2S+ stories, using materials that we now know were shared with them by conservative activist groups. The minister's announcement used specific communication tactics to heighten the sense of threat posed by these books. For example, the images and language excerpts were shared without permission about their content or narrative purpose in each book. Although the excerpts comprise less than 2% of the content in each of the novels, the entire books were labeled as, quote, extremely graphic, sexually explicit, age inappropriate, and pornographic. Government officials also repeatedly used elementary schools and elementary students to describe K-9 schools where the books were located. This language worked to inflate the rhetoric of threat to children, even though K-9 schools also included teen audiences. Book bans emerged not only from the letter of the law, but from its interpretation. By singling out these books, describing them in these terms, and stating that they are not appropriate in schools, Nicolaides effectively banned them. Documents obtained through a Freedom of Information request show the influence of American book bans on our province's policy. Email records revealed that the Chief of Staff for Education and Childcare directed employees to search PEN America's database of banned books in November 2024. They also show that staff looked at schools in Austin, Texas as a comparator, reporting that more than 80% of the books banned in Austin could be found in Calgary and Edmonton schools. A ministerial assistant checked libraries for books that were rated on the now defunct booklooks.org, which was created by a former member of Moms for Liberty. One study found that booklooks.org disproportionately labeled queer and trans content as inappropriate. Moms for Liberty is one of the largest parental rights activist groups in the US and is the force behind many of their book bans. As you can see, Action for Canada took credit for policies restricting school library books, and it tied it to their broader mission of restoring morality and common sense. The inclusion of Praise God indicates the Christian influence in their brand of conservatism. And that is why we want to contextualize this generation of book bans within our current political landscape. By using the rhetoric of parental rights, conservative and Christian nationalist groups are organizing to weave religiously inspired homophobia and transphobia into the fabric of public policy. And it started to work in Alberta. I'll just turn it over now to Jamie. You're welcome.
Thank you. Apologies as I get the tech ready. So this idea of conservative parenthood has emerged across the globe as a new site of social solidarity that views family as the last frontier. While some parental rights groups describe themselves as non-secular, religious conservatism and the desire for faith-based schooling, including homeschooling, is core to these movements. Modern conceptualizations of parents' rights can be traced to conservative activism in the US, including Anita Bryant's anti-gay campaigns, which some folks in the audience might be familiar with, and we'll explore a little bit further in my presentation. In Alberta, arguments for parental rights emerged in the 1970s in protest of birth control centers in Calgary, Edmonton, and Lethbridge. It reemerged in the 80s to build support for the conservative Christian homeschool movement. And again in the 1990s during Ralph Klein's decade-long refusal to sign on to the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child. Invocations of parental rights tend to rise in moments of conservative backlash to progressive policies. Parental rights groups like those pictured here, the Alberta Parents Union, Action for Canada, Parents for Choice in Education, and Parental Consent Alberta are gaining visibility in Alberta around this agenda of parental rights. Take Back Alberta is an organization that has a broader political agenda for the province, but parental rights are core to their value system. And while they present themselves as coalitions of concerned parents, that is a tactic to make it seem as though their work is from love and care. Not to say that it isn't from love and care, but it's also from another lens as well, because many of these groups who are concerned parents fall under a big tent that attracts a wide range of right-wing extremists, religious conservatives, and conspiracy theorists. This alliance that's shaped by the convergence of this idea of religious fundamentalism and populism has been described as the global right. One way that the global right defends traditional values is through pro-natalist projects that promote childbearing and increased birth rates amongst predominantly white native-born populations. Pronatalism is often a response to the changing demographics of a population, motivated by anti-immigrant and anti-2S LGBTQIA sentiments. And we can see the rise of both of those things very visible in the world around us right now. Rasmussen understands this kind of pronatalism as heteroactivism because of its primary concern with the traditional family, parental rights, and what is colloquially labeled as anti-woke. So as policymaking in Canadian education systems continues to lend credence to the notion of parental rights, the rights of children are undermined. The map on the screen here reflects the current state of anti-trans policies across Canada. As of probably now, it's already outdated because, as we know, the notwithstanding clause was being debated in the legislature. So this means, that tomorrow, I think, or whenever they're finished, perhaps they're finished now, we'll wake up and trans youth, trans Albertans will have fewer provincially and constitutionally protected rights, and this is not a result of measured discussions, broad consensus, or the normal machinations of democracy, which include evidence, which is core to the work that we do in the university. Rather, it's the result of coordinated heteroactivism. Gender ideology, as it's called, is a common enemy of the global right, which unites concerned parents worldwide to oppose queer and trans inclusion and even queer and trans existence. Things like inclusive sexual health education, trans athletes in sport, gender-affirming care, the rest of the things on this very long list. And of course, library books are targets of parental rights activism. The moral panics that are fueling the anti-trans agenda are rooted in misconceptions about gender, the socialization and development of sexual orientation and gender identity, and discourses of childhood innocence that are pervasive and position us as queer and trans folks as a corrupting threat. So myths of social contagion argue that exposure to 2S LGBTQIA ideas, especially in childhood, will cause confusion or it'll lead kids to take on queer and trans identities. A lot of the discourse about trans youth in the province is rooted in the idea of social contagion. This idea that something's contagious because children are being pressured to be trans. They're maybe doing it for attention. Maybe they're doing it for likes on Instagram. You can tell I don't have Instagram by the way I say that. Or maybe they're confused by what they read in a book called Melissa. These social contagion myths are not new, and we can certainly learn a lot from how they've been historically deployed. In the mid-1800s, there were some German psychiatrists who believed that homosexuality was acquired through bad habits, seduction, or a result of propaganda. From there, Hitler described homosexuality as infectious, as a plague of the nation because it endangered reproduction. After news about Christine Jorgensen's successful sex reassignment surgery spread within and beyond the US in the early 1950s, doctors called the rise in trans people seeking care a worldwide epidemic. Then, in her efforts to overturn protection for gay teachers, Anita Bryant argued that they were dangerous to children because homosexuals cannot reproduce, so they must recruit. As if we were that organized, let me just say. In the last few years, this idea of recruitment has been echoed, with the term groomer being co-opted in online right-wing spaces as a label for queer and trans adults and allies. That's important to note because the scope is broadening around how these things are applied. And then finally, the idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria was coined in a now retracted study to describe parents' perceptions and probably their valid fears that kids were coming out very quickly. But of course, their explanation was that it was media and their peers, and these kids weren't actually trans. So we see here the contemporary parental rights movement is built on a long lineage of anti-queer and anti-trans rhetoric that's rooted in this idea of social contagion. We've only covered here about 175 years, but I'm sure Kita will explore this a little bit more in terms of the colonial roots of normative gender and sexualities as well. So moving on to, again, Florida. You're welcome, Florida, for all of this free press. Not good press, but free. In his work on anti-oppressive theorizing, Kevin Kumashiro wrote that schools serve two functions. They privilege certain groups and identities while marginalizing others, and they legitimize this order by couching it in the language of normalcy, common sense, that idea. And so for that reason, schools have long been at the center of moral panics concerning gender and sexuality. So earlier, I referenced Anita Bryant. Here are some artifacts from her campaign in the late 1970s, which is an example of heteroactivism, the Save Our Children campaign. She worked to overturn protections for gay people in Florida, and then she hopped on over to the West Coast and joined the Briggs Initiative campaign in California that was working to keep gay and lesbian teachers out of schools. You'll notice the slogans that she's using in her campaign. They may be familiar. Save our children, protect our children. This language again reflects the idea of queerness as a contagion and a threat to children, especially in the school environment. This idea of protecting children too is in a lot of the rhetoric and kind of public-facing documentation from the government. Fast forward, these are protest signs from various locations of the anti-trans 1 million March for Children in Alberta. This is almost 50 years after Anita Bryant's campaigns. We can still see those echoes. While the language has evolved ever so slightly, the concern now extends beyond just queer teachers recruiting students to, like I said, anyone who supports education in schools, which is why the ramifications of the policies taking place right now affect folks who aren't trans and who aren't queer as well. The narratives of seduction, recruitment, infection, propaganda inform parental rights activism in the current context and help us to understand, again, the lineage of this current moral panic about school library books. Unfortunately, we've been here before. So what's at stake when books and resources are restricted? I'd like to draw on Miranda Fricker's work on epistemic injustice. I picked too many big words for too late on a Thursday night, but bear with me, as a way to frame some of the impacts that come from this. So she talks about two forms of epistemic injustice. This is injustice related to knowledge. So first is testimonial injustice. This is where one's knowledge is not viewed as credible, their lived experience is undermined, and their realities and ways of knowing are explained better by other people. This form of injustice is intimately related to prejudice and structural oppression, meaning that one is viewed as a less credible knower because of their identity. And we see how this operates broadly in the current context of anti-trans policies. Trans people are not seen as credible authorities of our identities, of our experiences. We cannot be trusted. Hermeneutic injustice refers to the absence of collective knowledge about one's identity, meaning they are not included as a subject in our broader kind of resources around social understanding. So we can better consider this a matter of erasure. So the systematic absence of representative knowledge limits a person's ability to name, theorize, and affirm their experiences of oppression because they're not seeing themselves in the world around them. And it also reinforces their position as a non-credible knower because they're rendered invisible, even impossible, in collective knowledge resources. The idea of symbolic violence also helps us to understand the impacts of book bans, where books are symbolizing the groups of people that are targeted for erasure, and we should be very concerned about that. And like the idea of hermeneutic injustice, omitting particular identities and knowledges helps to minimize the noticeability of white, cisgender, heterosexist normality, which then shelters it from critique. Access to queer and trans literature matters. Diverse literature is a foundation for pluralism. The connection between books and democracy should not be minimized. Rudine Sims Bishop describes the role that literature plays in providing windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors for children. Mirrors allow kids to see themselves in stories, while windows offer insights into the experiences of others, and sliding glass doors allows us to step into new worlds, new possibilities that we might not have otherwise seen. She writes that overly narrow and exclusionary curricula affect all students, not only those who are marginalized. If they see only reflections of themselves, such as mirrors and without windows to learn about others, young people will grow up with an exaggerated sense of their own importance and value in the world, and this creates a dangerous ethnocentrism. From the perspective of two former English teachers, Tanya and I, it's also important to note that self-selected literature supports reader engagement. Content aside, it's fundamental to developing and sustaining lifelong literacy. As other speakers have mentioned, that is core to democracy. And finally, access to representations of healthy sexuality is crucial for all youth. The content that was described in these books as pornographic in many ways exemplifies really important concepts of consent, communication, knowing what it's like to grow up in and understand a body that feels foreign to you. So I think that in the world that we live in terms of representations of healthy sexuality, books can offer so much, and the best way that we can support students in accessing them, or our children in accessing them, is inviting conversation about them. If we want to know, let's talk to them. Let's understand what they're reading, what they're curious about, what they want to know, and lead with relationality in that. I think that is super important. And on that note, I'm going to wrap up and pass it over to Kita.
Our wonderful sound person. Oh, yes. Okay, excellent. I have every intention of going rogue, if you don't mind. Okay. It's my dean, so on their cell phone. Oop. I'm just going to put this here. So now that all these wonderful, fantastic academics have spoken, I'll be chatting for a moment. Let's have some fun. This is a piece by Kent Monkman called Being Legendary. And that's a part of the spirit that I'd like to bring forward. So, Kita Gladju Nitsagasan, my name is Kita Gladju. I am Indigenous. My grandmother's family is from the Sucker Creek Cree Nation in Treaty 8 territory. My grandfather is Métis, going back to the Red River Valley. My mother is a part of the global minority. She's white. So a part of what I wanted to talk about a little bit today, if you will indulge me, I know I'm making you very nervous by standing right here, but so what I'd like to bring forward is I was a youth worker for more than a decade. I taught sex ed for more than a decade. And so I'm bringing forward some of the work that I do with youth, but also Indigenous histories and current realities and futurisms. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about is how, I'm sorry, this might be new for some of you. Having your rights taken away. It's not for me. The Indian Act, which was one of the first laws that Canada decided was really critical to create, subsection 43C said, a person is an individual other than an Indian. Under Canadian law, a person is an individual other than an Indian. And if someone is not human, you do not treat them humanely. So stories, Indigenous identities, and Indigenous genders are one of the first things that was attacked because we were too bold, we were too proud, we were too expansive. and it is easier to control people in boxes. So we're going to start with gender. When I talk about boxing gender, I want to first look at the way that most Western cultures and the dominant culture that we see today experience gender. So, the Western identity question is, what are you? We have lots of these lovely boxes, and as soon as you tell us what you are, we know where you go. Okay? And that's where you find community. This is simply one way of being. When we talk about ways of being, this is what we talk about. So one way of being is LGBTQ plus alphabet mafia. Welcome to this box. We are cuddled together for warmth, for political strength, for safety. This is community. Indigenous communities particularly, and again, there are so many Indigenous communities, both today and in the past. But when we talk about Indigenous gender and sexualities, we're talking about more than 4,000 nations, more than 155 gender-diverse, multi-gendered terms and ways of being. And when I bring my way of being forward, in my Cree teachings, each person is whole. You are whole and you have a spiritual or maybe purpose-driven dimension, you have an emotional dimension, you have a physical dimension, even when it malfunctions. You have a cognitive or mental dimension. But the cool thing is, and I think that this is something that may be forgotten, is there is no expectation for you to be tomorrow who you are today. And why would there be? We're different at 8 than we are at 80. And so in Indigenous sexualities and genders, the question is not what you are, your community. And you are necessary to the survival of the community, the flourishing of the community. So we do not place people in boxes away. We say, no, you're us. The question is, what role do you serve in community? We have work to do. What work will you do? That is a different perspective that doesn't require boxes. But then, there are other thoughts. So these are some of the books that have been banned, challenged, or banished, which we'll talk about, in North America. These are all Indigenous books. These are all children's Indigenous books. And I wanted to show you just a couple. So one of the books that was banned is Frybread, a Native American Family Story. It is by Kevin Noble Millard, and according to the publisher, it is told in a lively and powerful verse. The debut of author Kevin Frybread is an evocative description of a modern Native American family, vibrantly illustrated by Pura Pelba award-winning Juana Martinez Neal. Now, this is amazing. It's about a family making fry bread. I don't know if you've had fry bread. If you haven't, you're not living your best life. Get thee to some fry bread. I stood in the sun at the Stampede for an hour and a half in line to get fry bread this summer, and I would do it again. So the question for me was not just what book was banned, but I wanted to know why. For those in the back, the why that I found was that it uses Marxist critical race theory. It is divisive, racist, and socialist. Quotes from the book. Fry bread is food. It is warm and delicious, no lies. Piled high on a plate. Fry bread is time. It brings families together for meals and new memories. Fry bread is us. It is warm and tasty and an unexpected delight. Fry bread is skilled hands' love passed down through generations. Now, my Marxism might be a little bit behind, but I'm I'm just curious. So here's another one. This one from a Canadian author. For those of you who have not read this one, We Are Water Protectors by Carol Lindstrom and illustrated by Michaela Goad. It is an urgent rally cry to safeguard the Earth's water from harm and corruption, inviting young readers everywhere to join the fight. Okay, publishers, they're going hard. So why was it banned? Well, this picture book was too political, too divisive, and all of its talk of the black snake and destructive pipelines made people uncomfortable. Okay. I will do my best to honor Mother Earth and all its living beings, including the water and the land. I will always remember to treat the earth as I would like to be treated. Water is the first medicine. It connects us all. It affects and connects us all. Okay. As someone who moved from the coast to Calgary, I have seen so much pipeline propaganda, but I guess one book that says water is important to kids is just too hardcore. Now, I talked about boxed, we've talked about banned books, but there's something fun that's coming out that I'd like to talk about. So this is a book, Colonization and the Wampanoag Story by Linda Combs, according to the publisher. Until now, you've only heard one side of the story. The discovery of America told by Christopher Columbus, a lost man. Sorry. The Pilgrims and the colonialists. Here's the true story of America from the Indigenous perspective. Okay, publishers going hard again. And I'm not going to talk about what is in this book because it is the story of colonization. If you don't know, you should. So they took this nonfiction book and they put it in the fiction section. Okay. So we've got banned books, we've got boxed genders, and we've got banished histories. Why? Because it counters settler narratives of discovery and exploration. I always tell my students, when you hear the word explorer, I want you to hear unemployed. Okay? Explorer's not a job. It's kind of like being pre-law, you know? It's a vibe more than anything, okay? So let me be quite clear. Thank you for looking at the last 100 years, the last 10 years, the last 5 years. I'm going to be talking about the last 37,000 years. That's a couple millennia. The last ice age was over at about 11,000 years ago. Adorable. Pyramids 5,000 years ago. Quaint, right? Great Pyramids of Giza 4,500 years ago. So we're going to go way on back. And please remember that every single one of these words is the direct knowledge and continued knowingness and cultural knowledges that we still hold. So these are just some of the more than 155 different gender expansive ways of being from different communities that I've collected. You have here a picture which you can't see my citation on, but it just says unnamed two-spirit warrior. But let's name some. I'm calling in the Transcestors on this day of remembrance. On this day of remembrance, I'd like to remember some. Please note that in all cultures around the world, there's always been more than two genders. That's just adorable. Two? How do you even get along? Life is too short for two. So this is Wehwa, who is Zuni, and they were rad. They were some of the best political people. They actually were sent in 1886 to meet with President Cleaver. And he was like, this person is rad. He goes, she is the most knowledgeable person who's ever come into my space. She decided randomly to go out into what is now the grounds, or was before Trump remodeled, of the White House. She sat down and argued philosophy while she wove a blanket in front of them. That is such a move. To craft and just utterly destroy your enemies is beautiful. Speaking of destroying your enemies, this is Oshstich and their wife. Oshstich has one of the greatest names I have ever heard. The translation of the name means finds them and kills them. And they received this on a day where they were with their women relatives and their two-spirit relatives, and there was a raid. And this warrior single-handedly put down the art that they were creating and picked up a bow and a spear and finded them and killed them. And they are, again, part of the history that we hold. And this isn't a unique, special thing. These were our aunts, our uncles, our cousins. And they are still our aunts, our uncles, and our cousins. Are you kidding? We have no time for two genders. There's things to be done. There is awesomeness to be found. And we're here for it. I love these photos. They were taken at a two-spirit powwow in 2022. And I have to read. It's the only thing that I was like, all right, I'm going to print it out and actually use my notes. There is magic at a two-spirit powwow. People feel safe to be themselves. It's like cramming themselves out of their ill-fitting shoes to be, these constraints come off and they can dance. And no words can better describe the magic that happens than this brief interaction that we witnessed, this is the journalist, between an 8-year-old boy and an adult dancer at the two-spirit powwow. Boy, I've never met any two-spirit people. I think I might be two-spirit, but I'm not sure. Dancer, as you get older, you'll understand yourself better. Boy, when did you know? Dancer, oh, I knew when I was 5 years old, but I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Boy, I don't want to tell my friends. They make fun of me already. If I told them I was two-spirit, I think they would hate me. Deep breath. Dancer. Kids can be really horrible to each other. When you grow up, it will get better. Some people will love you even more for being who you are. Boy, could I wear women's regalia too? And this dancer said, of course, honey. If you want, we can make women's regalia together for you to dance in. I think I would like that. The truth about stories, it's all we are. As someone who came from a very small community of 20 people, I'm checking the time. Okay. What I wanted to say is that for those of you who are new to this human rights being a thing you have to fight for again, I'm so sorry. Here's some things you should know. When we constrain the stories that are told, we're limiting our ways of being with each other and in ourselves. There is no expansive space for us to move into. When we see people banning books, that is controlling knowledge. And for all of the words of freedom, I just love that. If you love being free, rattle those chains for me. If you love freedom, let someone else choose the books that your children cannot read. If you love being free, then be prepared to be afraid. Banishing histories, disconnecting our youth from their ancestors, from all of the people who came before them, who are epic, who show them how epic and legendary they can be. As for me and my cousins, let me tell you, babe, we have no time. We're out here being legendary. We're out here flourishing and fighting for your rights. You cannot silence the stories of nations of storytellers. we'll tell them on the street. We have before. And you cannot break our intergenerational relations, because when people pass in our ways of knowing, they don't go away. They're here with us. So, as you look at what is happening around you, I ask you to consider, in what ways are you being boxed? Are your knowledges being banned? And is the possibility and imagination that you hold also being banished? If you would like some book racks, this is a ribbon skirt, a graphic novel, 40,000 beads. Again, getting older children into graphic novels, Surviving the City, an amazing graphic novel. And for much older readers into the maybe college and university, shout out sassily to someone who is from U of C, Johnny Appleseed. That is, yeah, in the end, I think of one story that saved your life at some point and what it would have been like if you walked into one of those libraries and all the shelves are empty and you never, ever read it. Thank you very much.
Oh, gosh. It is your turn now. You know, we have 4 phenomenal, amazing people on stage, and they are ready for your questions. And so I invite you from the audience, if you'd like to have a conference, Aoife and I decided that we need to get our steps in today, so we're happy to run around. We would really encourage a bit of a conversation and engagement, and in this phenomenal group, they've got you. They got your back. So is there anybody who'd like to have to pose a question? Please raise your hand and we'll race around. While you're thinking of it, Tanya, one of the common questions is very common amongst teachers. They're saying it's just so difficult. We have so many diverse families. It's so challenging. I don't know if I can do it. What advice would you give the teacher who's like, oh my gosh, you know, there's a lot happening in the classrooms and I don't know if I can fight this fight for banned books. What advice would you give to that teacher who's just saying, I don't know, I got too many faiths, too many newcomers, too many immigrants. You know, what advice would you give to that teacher?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Thank you, Diane. I would say, you know, stand your ground. Check your inner core moral compass for what drives you and how you set up your own classroom. And then get your allies about you. Talk with other colleagues that are having similar concerns. And then go up the pay grade, because go talk to that assistant principal, vice principal or principal who gets more money than you, and it's their job to help you figure these thorny questions out. So don't leave it to yourself to try to figure out, or leave it aside and say, actually, that's too difficult, I'm just not going to deal with it. Do deal with it, dig in, and get your resources about you, and be sure to get the right answers and proceed accordingly. But don't give up, because you could be that person that provides that book, as Kita was saying, for that person that really needs that book. And if they're saying, no, that book can't be there, find a way to make it happen and have people support the decision that you've made in the classroom.
Thank you. Okay, folks. Oh, we have one. Excellent.
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so I have my question is, how can we like flip a little bit the script, because I don't know, like I hear it's perfect, but I hear myself in okay.
The rest of us don't.
Okay. Yeah, I wonder, how can we flip the script? Because I think a lot of, like, the real reasons why there are these book bannings, and they say they are afraid about for children, right? I don't think that's a real reason, because, like, for example, I was reading that in the US now, some, like, conservative pundit, they were saying that now because of the Epstein files, right? They were saying that now maybe having sex with the child is not really pedophilia, right? If maybe they were justifying like having sex with a 16-year-old girl or someone, right? And or like, for example, I work with farmers a lot in like rural Canada, and there was a lot in these rural communities. There was a lot of like sexual. There would come up like sexual abuse, or some of these. You wouldn't send like young girls to talk to some of the farmers. They were, you wouldn't send a young girl there, right? They knew the farmer would be predatory, and so this is everywhere, right? Like, and so these organizations probably they are based in rural Canada. So I think they know very well where the real threat is, and it's their own community, it's them, right? And they are flipping it and making it sound like it's the danger is coming from us, from the LGBT community. But I think they know very well it's not. So how do we flip the script and actually tell that? Make it like tell our story. The danger comes from straight families, from from what they think, from the family itself they are defending. That's where the danger is.
Okay, Kita has her hand up. Well, how do we flip it, Kita?
I think that what you're proposing is that the thing that they're telling us might not actually be the thing they're trying to accomplish. What a bold statement. Yes, I would like to establish very clearly. One of the things that I love so much is the sexually explicit piece when we talked about the 3 different sort of categories of things that folks like to ban. When they talk about pornography and when they talk about sexually explicit images, it's my absolute favorite. So as of June 2025, a Canadian study showed that 98% of our youth have seen sexually explicit materials. The average age was 12. 1/3 of the folks said at 10 years old they had seen sexually explicit images. So it ain't books, baby. Respectfully, that is absolutely the case. And the thing about sexuality and bodies and talking about some of these things in books is they're not pornography. Pornography is meant for arousal and entertainment of adults. These are stories talking about people's experiences, about characters. So the idea that the sexually explicit thing is the thing that we are saving our children from, we're not. They have access to the most extreme things right now today. And we know that they're seeing them. What they aren't getting is anything human. They have no context. They are not being, pornography is a performance, right? They're not understanding anything else about it. And these stories, even when at appropriate age levels, they include these pieces, they are contextualized. So I would love to just set that down just for a moment over here, the idea that we're saving our children from sexually explicit books, which they're not reading, right? I am begging and borrowing and stealing to get my nibblings to read, but that narrative does something interesting. So today there is a court, there is something political that is happening. Today, human rights, and it's not just trans people's human rights, it's our human rights, are being legally and potentially illegally set aside. So we do need to flip the script. Book bannings, sometimes we get caught up in the debate. Let's set the debate aside. Research is what we do. Shirk, it's what we slave to do, so that we have that information. So the information is there. Children are not going to the shelves of the books to find this content. That's so not old school. I'm even thinking like that's like
It's like Gen X.
It's like
Too much work.
so boomer to do that. I don't know how else to say that. So flipping the script. The thing that I do when I think about flipping the script is what is the most boring thing that is happening right now that is really hard to hear because they're talking about drag brunches. What is the thing that is going on right now that is so boring that they put at the bottom of an agenda? And for me as an educator, that's policy, baby. That's all of the places and spaces like boards in schools and all of those places and spaces where parents just have no time. It's hard to have the time and capacity, as someone had stated, to do this work. But the boring things are often where the most powerful things are happening. So flipping the script is, I don't debate folks anymore. I believe them that they are passionate, but I'm not interested in debating them. I'm interested in actually saving our kids. Yeah, so that's for me.
Okay, yeah, I'll jump in. Interestingly, a good friend of mine, an expert in gender-based violence in the audience tonight, published an article speaking a little bit about this issue this week, talking about gender-based violence prevention. Because the concerns that are parlayed as reasons, as justifications for the policy are, again, the fear of grooming, the fear of sexual violence, which is very real and impacts so many people, so many more people than the stats enumerate. And so I think it's so important to frame the protection of reading as part of a broader gender-based violence prevention strategy, because that's what it is. Having access to information is crucial. Having access to evidence-based information coming from sexual health education is really important in preventing that gender-based violence. So I think one of the things that we can talk about is say, like, we agree gender-based violence is a serious issue. Gender-based violence as sexual violence, gender-based violence as transphobia and homophobia. Those are all under this big umbrella of lots of different ways that violence occurs in families, in public, in all of these different spaces. So I think one of the things to think about is how can we understand the work that we're doing, the right to read, the right to information as part of the gender-based violence strategy, and say that's what we're on that page too. We think we are worried about gender-based violence. We're worried about sexual violence. This is prevention, because a lot of the education policies that have been implemented are undermining gender-based violence prevention in the province. The research shows that addressing the roots underlying this gender-based violence and sexual violence, like misogyny, racism, gender inequality, transphobia, colonialism, these things enforce power imbalances and create conditions for perpetrators to be developed and people to experience victimization. So I do think talking about it in that way is really important. And talking about, to Kita's point, like this is not pornography. I think we have to move away. There was that one U.S. case that I think a lot of people colloquially speak to is like pornography. You know it when you see it. This is not pornography. And in fact, we need to talk about this as representations of healthy sexuality. This is information for youth, information that can be really crucial in whether it's in understanding more about themselves or understanding that I had this experience of what is being described here as sexual violence. I need to seek help for that. So I do think that is a space of, I don't know if it's entirely flipping the script, but addressing head on that the work that this encompasses is preventing gender-based violence and sexual violence by arming young people with information, empowering them about autonomy, because autonomy is crucial in preventing gender-based violence.
While we wait, I have a quick question. If you were the idea of becoming, you know, that we're not who we are today, who we were yesterday, and we aren't in whatever meant. We're always becoming. We're always part of that. So I think that's a really difficult concept for a lot of people for a lot of parents who are reading the kinds of concerns that you've talked about tonight. That concept is very difficult to grasp. But so many books beautifully position like ourselves as a process of becoming. And I was wondering if you were to recommend a book, any of you, to give to a parent who's confused that they're not really understanding what's happening with their kid, what would you say?
Every book.
Or 18 books.
Ryan, you look
Yes,
like you.
I mean, I don't know if it's cheating to bring up genderqueer again, but like I think like that's such an accessible text for parents as well. Like I think it really like there's this fear around pronouns, for example, like, oh my goodness, if they change their pronouns, like things are gonna get out of control. It's like, no, I just use different pronouns because that's what feels right for me. It's that simple. So I think that's a really good counter to maybe some adults who are, again, concerned about their children experimenting with different pronouns, which is something they can totally do. You know, in Maya Kobabe's journey of like, initially, he begins with they, them pronouns and then discovers the Spivak pronouns, which are E, er, M. They're also neo-pronouns, but I think it takes a lot of the fear out of what that process is like and just shows it as like this kind of like natural extension of identity. So I think that's like, it's a book that teaches about these concepts without feeling like it's, you know, simplifying them too much. Like it's just rooting it in this one person's journey. And I think that's kind of the important thing too, especially reacting against these narratives of, like Jamie mentioned, like contagion. Like it's not about that at all. It's like this one individual journey that turns out in a certain way. So I think that's a great read for sure.
Thank you.
Do you think it was the most controversial book in the book, ma'am? In the way it was posed in the public discourse? And Tanya's nodding her head. I don't know if Ryan, you want to start, or Tanya?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just quickly say, yeah, in 2023, it was the most banned book in the U.S. So it's definitely drawn, I think, the most controversy in that way.
Oh yeah, I think it's primarily mostly because of that one image in genderqueer that people just, as Jamie pointed out, they just take it out of context. It's a story, as Kita pointed out, and further to Diane's story that opened this evening, and your question, Aoife, as well, about becoming. What safer place to become who you are than by just reading a book, maybe alone or in a book club or talking with others about it. That's a great and safe way to learn about yourself. And you know, that book was singled out just because of one particular image in the book, but it's a very important and empowering book for people that they do need to see themselves. As we talked about the mirrors, the sliding doors, the windows. You need to be able to see yourself in the book to feel that you belong. It's very basic.
I would also add, I think one of the pieces that is really difficult is that we are flush with resources. Like there are so many books, most of them really great, lots of really great resources, some kind of innocuous that sound like they will be supportive, but you know, might lead you down a pathway. I think one of the pieces I want to reiterate is like that relationality element, because there are 1,000 books, but 1,000 books will not necessarily change your mind about you know, what your fear is or what your deep concern is. I think you have to do that inner work before the outer work, you know, can support you in that. So I do think that, and those fears are real around, you know, the myriad fears that parents have about their children. That fear feels real, but again, doing that inner work, yeah, is so important.
Yeah, I think I'll add there that there could be, I think, two pieces. So in that becoming, I think a part of it is that fear of being disconnected for your children or for not understanding the world at large, much less the world of your child. And I think another piece I would add is it could be helpful for parents to read some of the stories from when they were growing up as they were becoming. So like, when was the last time you read a Judy Blume book? Do you remember how freaking weird everything was? And how, what were there stories where you felt seen as you were becoming? And then maybe you trade books with your kid. That is a thing that for my father, we didn't trade Judy Blume books. I would probably try now. That would be fun. But we traded science fiction books. And my father, who felt like I think I was a world away from him, would slide me his Isaac Asimov. And it became a shared language between us. And I think that I don't think it's a book. I think it's books. And it's not books, it's stories. And maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a TV show. But part of what we've also been talking about is like the thing that I want to explicitly say is that it's stories that make us visible. Stories that are that place that, when I worked with youth, we had disclosures, and often it would be through the lens of stories where we would talk about something. We would talk about Twilight was the big book when I was a youth worker, and we would have conversations, and there would be young women who would talk about gender-based violence in their relationships, and I would say that the other piece is that if you don't read all of these stories, you don't always have the language or the understanding to identify abuse. And that's a part of the gender-based education to prevent violence, is that some of us grow up so that we know where this violence happens. It happens in our homes with people we trust. And so if that is your family, your reality, your community, if there is something wrong there, a fish does not know it is wet. And it is sometimes only when through stories we go, when you go, oh yeah, that's totally normal, and your friend's like, that's not normal. And stories are a way to go beyond your own fishbowl. And so I would say, yeah, what made you feel seen when you were weird? Are you willing to trade books with your kids or trade favorite movies? And remember that our kids are learning the language to make themselves safe and heard, and to be able to identify things that are not okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we have one final question, and then we're going to have to wrap it up for tonight. But
Thank you. I almost forgot because I was just so drawn in there what my question was. But we're talking a lot about youth, and I think I want to hear from you folks as academics working in the university sector. We're seeing things like book bans, trans rights being taken away, impacting our students as well. And so what would you like to see academics do to ensure that we are addressing things like book bans and kind of pushing the boundaries, because I think there is a lot of fear for academics in the university setting as well.
Tanya, in your senior leadership role, I'm going to pass that to you.
That's a great question, and my colleague Catherine Burwell's in the audience, and you teach this all the time. You're trying to prepare your pre-service teachers for the diversity of the 21st century classroom, and just informing people about the politics of the land and how this can come up, and discussing, and don't be afraid to discuss these controversial topics with university classes, especially if you're preparing professionals for professional settings like teachers, nurses, etc. And say like, hey, look, this could be happening to you. Like the opening question that Diane posed. I mean, what are you going to do when your administrator says, yeah, no, you like what we show those images from Florida, take all those books out of the shelves or cover them up. Is there any way you can get around that? Like, what are some ways that you can inform yourselves about the laws that are applicable? Your charter rights that are right there in terms of freedom of expression, and you can say, well, this is I am safeguarding my charter rights. What right are you to tell me that I cannot teach these books? Like, sure, they've been banned by whatever authority, but what if we're going by a different authority? You know, there could be more than one way of seeing this. So we have to have the courage to bring up these controversial topics in the classroom, in the university settings, so that our pre-service teachers are going out into the classroom prepared, so at least they've thought a little bit about this. You know, there are teachers, and some of my friends here this evening who are teachers and administrators in school settings who could also answer this question very well as well. I'll let other people approach the question as well. So,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I can jump in on the topic of censorship that we're talking about. I think one of the powers, one of the invisible powers of these laws or these policies is like the threat, the violent, the threat, the unknown, the danger, and so often it is it's like that self-censorship that ends up having the greatest effect. And this is particularly true. So thinking in the school context and like pre-service teachers, folks who are precarious entering a profession, when they're threatened with their employment, their livelihoods, that self-censorship is protection, but also it has effects. So I think it is something that's really important to be aware of. Is the fear is valid because those threats are real. There's policies that say if you do not comply, X, Y, Z. But it is important, to Tanya's point, to know your rights. So I think understanding how self-censorship operates, know your rights, know the policy. Policy, if I'm honest, when I started teaching, I did not look at the policies because it was way too overwhelming and I had stuff to teach and things to mark and things to clean and X, Y, Z. And now I've spent so much time with policy that I found it like a little security blanket because it tells me what explicitly I can and cannot do. And also, it allows me to work within the system to find creative ways to empower students and inform students, while also knowing that, in my interpretation of the policy, I'm good here. I have academic freedom, or I'm teaching current events. Like being able to work within the system in that way, I think is really important. But yeah, self-censorship is truly how this operates. So I think arming yourself with information, finding your allies, being informed so that you're not putting your employment at risk, but working within what you have to empower folks.
Ryan?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can just speak from experience with 251 in particular. Again, Kit can't be here today, but I think he would probably mention, there sometimes are risks with teaching controversial topics and books. So the first time that he taught 251 banned books, he did receive a few student complaints about, I think, texts like genderqueer. And it was students talking from a religious perspective, saying this understanding of gender kind of conflicts with, or seems like it really undermines these sets of beliefs. But then there are also students who will write in and say, thank you so much for teaching these books, for helping us have conversations about marginalized communities. And I think just kind of the importance of classes like 251 and the work that Kit is doing is providing the context and the critical thinking that students need to understand these books, not as like landmines or whatever, but as really important narratives. So for example, one that we haven't talked about today that has faced challenges in schools recently is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. And so the conversation around that text, as Kit was teaching it, was that it was banned for depicting anti-Black racism. And the sort of argument there seemed to be it's too upsetting to read, or it's reinforcing anti-Black racism. And when we looked at it critically and we're using our close reading skills, it's going, okay, actually it's looking at internalized anti-Black racism. It's being critical of these systems and of these ways that anti-Black racism shows up. So I think, again, just in the university classroom, being able to guide students through those conversations and to give them the skills to think critically about what they're reading and understand it more deeply is kind of essential there.
Kita?
Yeah, I might not have been the right person to go last, but I do think part of it, working at the university, and my program is adult learning, so I work now with adults, or people who say that they are. so there is like some of these things that we talked about today don't come into play because they're theoretically adults. And I hope that there will always be an opportunity for adults to talk about stories and books and to do the work that we do in education. I am also a social worker and a community activist. And just a reminder again that what is happening today is human rights in Alberta are being set aside. So I think that absolutely know the policies, absolutely know what is meant to be happening. Please don't expect it to happen. Please don't expect that. I think all of us are in a constant and somewhat numbing experience of rolling shock as some of these things happen. And I will fight for your human rights even though I know it will cost me. And what that looks like for some of us is different than what it looks like for others. Sexism is gendered and racism is sexualized. But I will say that it is likely that you will have to fight for the rights you thought you already had, and you will have to fight for the rights that you do not yet have. And you should always be able and have that moment with yourself about what risk is feasible for yourself when you speak up, and to also be honest and think about how you can leverage the space, place, authority, and safety that you might have. That would be the piece there. Definitely, again, I love policy. I am a policy nerd because I think it's in some of those spaces that really powerful things are happening. But we're in a situation where people are not following their own policies. So in that case, who would like to break some rules with me? Yeah.
Folks, this has been such a ethical, dialogic space. I am truly honored and humbled by the depth and the authenticity of the work that you're doing and the importance of the work you're doing. And yet there was moments of hope and advocacy for all of us. And I think that's a good way for us to end this day.